Okay, we're at this again. We had some technical difficulties earlier, brothers. Sorry about that. All right. A big sigh of relief. We had to actually reboot everything. So if you guys can hear me, please put a 1 in the chat. If not, had some technical difficulties earlier. So we had to start everything over again. So guys, drop a 1. Drop a 1. 1. Okay. Let me know. If you hear me, put 1. If you can't hear me, put a 0. You can't. Okay. So you can hear me. You can hear me, D. Hayes. Okay. Thank God. Okay. Okay, cool. Whew. Wow. Yeah, this is a long, trying day. So let's get back at it. So, all right. Okay. All right. I got you. So we're going to start this again. So, Thanksgiving. What does it mean? So, the first thing we're going to go into is Sir Walter Raleigh. Who is that? Well, he is an individual that is known throughout history as an explorer, an expeditioner. He actually went to Hatteras Island. What is Hatteras Island? Well, it's located off North Carolina, dividing the Atlantic Ocean and Pamlico Sound. It runs the coast to Cape Hatteras. So it's the Outer Banks, and there's a little image of it right there. Don't really feel like blowing that up, but let's go down. So this talks about the colonial time. All right. And one thing that's interesting is that they have a town called Buxton. And if you guys know, Buxton was actually a community in Iowa, which was a so-called Black community. All right. There's different words that are often used, and that's something that intrigued me, but it's neither here nor there. All right. Go back. So, hope all is well with you, D. Hayes. Hope you're healing up. All right. So let's keep on going. So you have the Hatteras Island, and you also have Roanoke. All right. So Roanoke Island, which is the next. So Roanoke Island is on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. All right. So there it is right there in the picture. It's named after historical Roanoke, Carolina Algonquins. Now, they always try to make them white looking, but Algonquins, along with the language, they're so-called ebony people. All right. And I have pictures and slides of that, but I don't feel like going into that right now. All right. And you also have in the Carolina, specifically South Carolina, the Gullahs, which they have a slang word called Geechee. So this is the first stop that the individual named Sir Walter Raleigh actually encountered. Now, with Thanksgiving, 90% of the indigenous population within these small areas succumbed to disease. Again, we told you that it could have been due to corrals, which is Europeans that came in and they brought different diseases. All right. One being salmonella. Of course, they always say that it was smallpox, but I believe it was due to corrals being so close and transmitting different diseases through food. It was possibly that. So you have forced relocations, and you have outright slaughter of said native indigenous or aboriginal indigenous people, and British ownership of the U.S. is still in force today as we speak. All right. So we're going on to the next thing, which would be something intriguing that most people do not know, and that is a papal decree. So a papal decree in Britain. So Britain is owned by the Vatican, and U.S. is still owned by the British. The IRS form 1040 is in fact a tribute to the British Crown and a veiled reference to the preceding 1040 days before the 1260 day of Great Tribulation, which makes up Daniel's 2,300 days. So that would be income tax formed in the 1783 treaty, and that would be IRS publication 6209. Okay, if you guys want to know more about that, just put IRS form 1040 is in fact a tribute to the British Crown. Interesting reading. Some of these are kind of like but we'll keep on going. So you have the Puritans, and you have the Carnazy Indians, which were one of the Indian tribes that most people don't know. Carnarsie. I'll type that into the chat for you guys. So that was a Native American tribe that is long forgotten, and they were so-called ebony men. Okay, so the Puritans later moved to Manhattan. Man-Atan is the Egyptian man god. All right, so what is that? You have Atan, the Egyptian god, Britannica. All right, so Atan, the ancient Egyptian god and sun god, depicts the solar disk. All right, so oftentimes you have a lot of Europeans that use occult or arcane concepts with their names of specific cities, some of which believe that America is a very holy land, which many people believe. So they ascribe different deities that they worship. Okay. And one side note, you have the Statue of Liberty, which is actually Hecate. So, yeah. So, for the most part, with Thanksgiving, proclamations were celebrated for war victories against heathen nations. All right. So, we discussed the Pequots. All right. So, the Pequots. Okay. They were so-called ebony men and women, and they actually celebrated on Thanksgiving the Pequot Massacre, where they actually, John Winthrop. So who is John Winthrop? Well, let's look at the images of the Pequots first. Okay. So you have images, and I had some better ones, but I forgot where I put them at. So that's an image of the Pequots. All right. So-called ebony men, women. And I had a better one, which had conquistadors, which are so-called black men, but I don't know if I can find it. It's in my file somewhere, but I don't know where it's at. But man, I had that in my other video. If you guys want to see that, it's in my other video, which is on Patreon. So, doggone it. Okay, if I can find it, I'll find it. But it was so-called Spaniards, conquistadors, and they were so-called black men, and they were in knights outfits. So the steel or metal outfits. If I can find it. Anywho, since I can't find it, let's just get back into it. Okay, so you had the Pequots, right? And we discussed that in the previous video. 700 Pequot Indians were massacred, which is now Groton, Connecticut. So what is Groton, Connecticut? Well, did I open Groton, Connecticut? No, I did not. All right. And Groton, Connecticut is a very important city, specifically to, it's a port city. It's important because it's a naval base for submarines. So there's an image of U.S. naval submarine. Okay. So this is where the massacre occurred, and who did it? Well, it was an individual named John Winthrop. So oftentimes when you had Europeans, that especially European colonial powers, they would send over representatives to best take on the crown. Oftentimes they would send people over and they'll give them like governor positions. So we discussed this a couple videos ago, and it was about John Locke, and he was sent over on behest of England with the company called it wasn't the Dutch East Indian Trading Company. It was a trading company that shipped often Europeans over to America, specifically prisoners. And James Oglethorpe was a prison reformer. This is off the top of the dome, brother. So this is later on down the line, but they'll often put these individuals in governorship. Basically, it was just a title to best seat the interests of the crowns that they work for. So he worked for the Massachusetts Bay Company. All right. And he was an interesting guy. So they murdered in pre-dawn 700 Pequot Indians in Groton, Connecticut. And the key means green corn. All right. God, New Year begins with the new moon following the spring equinox on Abib. The Pequot natives were gathered for the annual Green Corn Festival. Victims were shot. They were buried alive, clubbed in the Longhouse. Children were sold into English slavery. So you have what's called spiriting. And there was a book called Kidnap years ago. And you read it when you were in school, and it discussed children being kidnapped from England and sold into slavery, often work in factories, often were forced to work on plantations and things of that nature. So this was a common practice. All right, let's get back. So he was an interesting individual. And let's see a better image of him. Let's see if we can find a better image. There you go. So that's actually how he looked. So that's not Wikipedia whitenizing him. He really did look like this. So next we're going into the Breach Treaty, which was Wampanoag Chief Meta Comet, and we discussed him in the previous video, whose father was a person that signed the first peace treaty with British colonialists. And what is the peace treaty? Well, the Pilgrim Wampanoag Peace Treaty. Okay, so in present-day Massachusetts, the leaders of the Plymouth colonists acted on behalf of King James, and they promised not to do hurt upon one another. Now they're supposed to give each person, so let's say a person from England, actually, well, I think it was called Albion at that time, but let's just say a person from England actually did harm on a Native American tribe, then they would actually send that person over. And same thing, the Wampanoag broke the peace treaty, they would send over the person to the Plymouth settlement for punishment. We all know that that was a breach treaty. Okay, but if you like this article, you can actually go to history. Now, one thing I don't like is entertainment, because it's not all factual, because oftentimes they blur the line, and that's some things that I don't like. There's some things in here in this statement that I don't agree with. That's not historically accurate. One thing is they were sending over a lot of people for religious persecutions. Yes and no. Okay, some of them came over as Sephardic Jewish people that were there to grow interest and wealth, and some came over on the behest of, like I showed you in the previous video, that were actually representing the Spanish crown, and they were so-called black men that were knights and were conquistadors, and they came over to conquer. So it was not about religious persecution, it was about conquering. But that's neither here nor there. So this is King Philip, the brother. Okay, so this was Wampanoag Chief Meta Comet, who was later named King Philip, who was impaled on a spike. Okay, so for 24 years, and who was he impaled on a spike by? Well, he was impaled on a spike by the colonists. Okay, so Turkoman, after whom the turkey is named, called this the Palo, P-A-L-O, and was put on display for 24 years. Again, that's more symbolic as a warning for the event. 24 being the veiled reference to the Greek letter she, which is X. And there's a reason why they use she or X, because let's see, this will be King Philip, so they show. Okay. Okay, right. That's King Philip. We'll go with that. Okay. That's Wikipedia. That's who they represent as King Philip. But she, or the X, and that's the Native American King Philip, who would be a Wampanoag. All right. See, that's an actual image. That is historically accurate. That's what he looked like. All right. So the X is really the crossroads. That's what it represents. And also, you had Constantine that carried the X into battle. He did not carry a cross. Cross really represents Tammuz. I don't know why they try to represent the cross as a T, but it really represents as an X. And if I can find a cross of Constantine, you know what? I'll come back and I'll show you the cross of Constantine, because you probably don't want to see that. Oh yeah, they were savage. They were. Yes, they were, D. Hayes. I concur. All right. So let's get back into it. So colonists referred to Chief Metacomet as King Philip after King Philip IV of France. Now, this individual was interesting. I don't know if that's too accurate an image of him, but we'll go with that. Because what he did was interesting. We're going to go down, and of course, you had Flanders, that you had so-called black men that were Flanders. Not all. The Mongols, same thing. You had so-called black men that were Mongols. And some of you guys that study military history know this. But this is something that's interesting with him. Suppression of the Knights Templar. Don't worry about that image. It is what it is. Philip was substantially in debt to the Knights Templar, a monastic military order, whose original role was protectors of the Christian pilgrims in the Latin East. Okay. Which the Latin East would be more or less like towards Turkey and Antioch and Tripoli and Jerusalem. Okay. So they had many savage wars, but you guys already know that, and have been largely replaced with the banking and other commercial activities at the end of the 13th century. As popularity of the Crusades had decreased, support for the military orders had waned. Philip was disgruntled and complained against the Knight Templar and excused to move against the entire organization that existed in France, in part to free himself of his own debts. Now, he had a lot of debts. He did. Okay? So he used heresy, which was typical. All right? That's why they were being burnt right there. Okay? And he also wanted to use it to weaken the papacy, the French control of papacy. Okay? So this is the image that they have of Philip IV. All right, we'll go with it. So you also have the King of Spain that was called Philip, which they said the Wampanoag chief was named after. So this is Philip of Spain that they say they were. And that's, again, you got to understand Wikipedia with these images. That's what they want to present. Okay, fine. We all know what he really looked like, but we'll go with that. Okay. So you had the King Philip of France in 1307 ordered the Pope Clement IV to issue a vox in excellesso, and I'll put that in the chat. All right, just so you guys can know what that looks like. Okay, so what does that mean, brothers? Well, that means voice on high from God to disband the order and dispose of their assets in 1312. Historians mistakenly assigned the King Philip II of Spain, who prosecuted French and Indian wars. Okay, so many of those wars had so-called black men that were fighting against the French, and we discussed this a couple videos over with Tecumseh. Tecumseh, if you go across the Ambassador Bridge to Canada from Detroit, you'll see Tecumseh. It's a small sliver of Ontario, and we had a war in Fort Detroit, which the British were supposed to back up the native indigenous people, including Tecumseh, against the war against the France, and they did a handshake deal, shake, shake, shake. Hey, let's screw these Indians over, so-called black men, and we'll just leave them in the slaughter. And they went in the slaughter against the France with no backup from the British. So be it. Today, the order are the Jesuits and the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, Cyprus, Rhodes, aka Hospitaliers, right? So, with Thanksgiving in 1612, Pentauxet, Petauxet, Pentayet Indians, I think it's Pentayet, just in case. Let's go to Pentayet. So these are Pentayet Indians. These are the descendants. Okay, these are the descendants. This is from New York. These are the descendants. Okay, this is a brother that's a Pentayet back in time. Okay, well, they say it's swapping out, but these are the Pentayets, so-called black men and so-called black women. There you go. That's what a Pentayet looks like. All right, so now that you got that in reference, so the Pentayet Indians were loaded onto slave ships bound to England. Those left behind were driven from their land and intentionally infected. In Jamestown, colonial debtors were forced to work, starved on board ships destined for debtors' prison. They decide to poison the wine. In 1623 feast in which 200 Indians died and blamed them instead. It's similar to 9/11, 1835, the murder of the pioneers of Mountain Meadows by the Mormons dressed as Indians. So in case you guys want that article, so that's the Pentayets, okay, so-called black men. And this is the article, okay, that discusses the Mountain Meadows Massacre. In case you want to know it, all right, this is somewhat accurate. So this discusses the Mountain Meadows Massacre. It was a series of attacks resulted in the mass murder of at least 120 minutes of the Baker, Farnchers, and Wagon train. The massacre occurred in Utah, in Mountain Meadows, by Mormon settlers called the Nauvoo Legion, okay, and Southern Paiute Native Americans. All right, so there you go, and that's what they look like. All right, so-called, people of ebony descendantry. It is what it is. Moving on to the next thing. All right, a Rosicrucian Grand Master Abraham Lincoln made Thanksgiving an American holiday. American means Amaru, Can, priest of the Canaanite serpent, and god Amaru and the Amoral and his staff of authority. Okay, so Amaru, it's basically a Mesopotamian city. It's patron god. All right, and you guys know Mesopotamia is the center of where some of the Babylonian mystery schools actually came from. So Amorite, Amaru people, okay, you can see it in Sumerian texts. So oftentimes you have words that are used here in America, specifically holidays, that these holidays are connected to occult or arcane practices and principles that they're just transferred over. Now, there are certain Native American tribes that did practice day of harvest or feast and things of that nature. However, for the most part, their practices were based on their spiritual systems, and they did exist. But what you're seeing now is not a merging of Aboriginal or Indigenous American harvest dates. It's based on occult principles and polytheistic principles and Wiccan principles that are transferred over from Europe. Okay, which is why they use specific imagery, as we discussed in the previous video. So, okay, the same time that President Lincoln ordered his soldiers against starving Sioux Indians in Minnesota. So this is a little bit of history on Thanksgiving, all right? Just a little bit of extra sauce. So turkey was first domesticated by the Aztecs. And this is the last full-blooded Aztecs. You've all seen this image, okay? That's what Aztecs look like. They were pretty short, about 5 feet to 4'7". Okay, some didn't even get to 4 feet 8. I think the tallest one that they show was like 4'11". They're very small for some reason. I don't know why. But this is what your Aztecs look like. And this is their last full-blooded one. See the brother and his lady? They got those noses that you see on the Aztec temples. And this is an image of the Aztec god. All right, who's a blood god, by the way. So, and that is the person who he is sacrificing ritualistically. And we can go all into the Aztecs and the Mayans. The Mayans were also so-called black, and they had an article where they were mummifying women or a girl, and she had braids and everything like that. And it was in BBC. So you have Rosicrucian, 33rd degree, Freemason, Hellfire Club initiate, and astrologer Ben Franklin. All right, let's pull Ben Franklin up. All right, where's old Ben? Let's go, Ben Franklin. Okay, don't act like that. So Ben Franklin was a runaway slave. Most people don't know this. All right. But just in case you guys don't know, he was actually brought over to the United States and have his passage paid. They often would use indentured bonds. It's a bank bond. If you guys don't know about it, read the 3rd edition bond book. Banks issued it. And he was actually indebted. Let's mark that off. He was indebted to a relative. I believe it was a uncle or something of that nature. And he was a slave and he ran away, as many Europeans ran away. So this is a better image of old Ben Franklin, who was possibly an occultist himself. If you go and you look at his history, it's possible that Ben Franklin did ritualistic sacrifice, as he had a ton of bones under one of his estates. And he had slaves for the Philadelphia Gazette. This is a little bit just off the top of the dome. All right, all about the Benjamins, huh? Shouts out to old Ben. So Ben Franklin chose a turkey for the national bird because America was to be fattened, stuffed, and consumed one day as a world scapegoat. Turkey is a name derived from Turkish Turkomen. All right, let's go to Turkomen. So Turkmens are known as the Turkmen Turks, are Turkic ethnic group derived from Central Asia, the steppes, mainly in the Turkmenistan, which is kind of like when Borat does the Afghanistan. He doesn't do Afghanistan, he does Kazakhstan, right? So this is the people he's talking about: Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Afghanistan, and Iran. Okay, the North Caucasus. Okay, so who are the Turkomen? Well, they were Arab merchants. Okay, and Arab is a term because Arab is a general term because you have so-called ebony men that are of Arab descent. So don't really look at that term too much. Again, Wikipedia and people using words to ascribe different groups. If you really see different Arab groups in Africa, they look like you too. So I guess they mean white people from that area. Turkmen were Arabs living in Turkey whose religion was Kabbalah. They didn't believe in Islam. That they didn't. Yeah, the Olmecs were also so-called black men, or they call them the cheese. Yeah, but so you had Turkmen, all right, and you know what? They actually worship wasn't Islam. They worship the Babylonian Talmud. That's right. So Thanksgiving has different aspects of the Babylonian Talmud. All right. And the Talmud isn't just connected to uh, Judaism, it actually goes beyond Judaism because the people from that region, and we'll get into that in a second. Okay. So white people or ethnic Europeans from East Europe whose religion was the Kabbalah. All right. And no, this is not Jewish. The Talmud uh, is their oral law, which was put in writing, and they learned from Babylonian and Persian captivity. So when they were enslaved by the Babylonians, and if you guys know what the Babylonians look like, go look them up. So, okay. So, Talmud was around for thousands of years, and this is based on in Kabbalah too. The Kabbalah is based on mysticism, but that's mysticism that was really Babylonian, and it was passed down to those in captivity. So they just took on the religious belief system, much like you have so-called black people here that took on Christianity, which some did come from over in Europe, specifically Wales and England with Christianity. But many of the so-called Aboriginal indigenous did not practice Christianity, and they took that on. So this is pretty much so what they were worshiping. And turkey is a slang for stupid, ineffectual person. Franklin Roosevelt, let's go back to old Frank. There he goes with his ugly mug. Okay. Ineffectual person. Franklin Roosevelt commercialized Thanksgiving by moving it to the third Thursday in November to kick off the month-long celebration of Saturnalia, Brumilda, and Hanukkah, Christmas, and Nativity of Sol Invictus, aka Lucifer's birthday. So, in Brumilda. All right. So, for you guys that want to know what Brumilda is, no, that's not what I'm looking for. You know what? I'll just have to go with the definition that I know. It's a Byzantine Empire. Okay. So that's not it. So let's click off of that. Go back to old Ben. So what is Brumilda? Well, in the Byzantine Empire, this was the beginning of the new wine festival held in honor of Dionysos, which lasted until winter solstice. Bruma, Bruma. It honored Dionysus and was condemned by the church. It was popular with the court and celebrated until at least the 12th century. All right. And that's actually from Oxford University Press. See, so that's Brum. Let's see if I can get the spelling right. Brumalia. No, that's not right. I always mess up the spelling for that. Brumalia. So this is the crux of the whole video. So you say, what is Brumalia? Well, it was an ancient Roman winter solstice festival honoring Saturn, aka Cronus. And what is Saturn? Well, Saturn is worshipped in many religions, specifically in Wiccan. All right, and Saturn is Luciferian, and you have what's that guy, the action character that was in that movie, and it was a movie that just came out. Thanos. Thanos is Saturn. That's what Thanos represents. So, Ceres, Demeter, and Bacchus in some cases. By the Byzantine era, the celebrations commenced on the 24th of November and lasted for a month until Saturnalia, or the waxing of the light. So, Brumalia, that is what Thanksgiving really is in veneration of. Brumalia. Okay? It has nothing to do with giving thanks to family. Okay? It has everything to do with occult reasons. So let's look at the Webster Merriam Dictionary of Brumalia. Just don't take my word for it. A pagan festival held in winter solstice, which some features of celebration of Christmas seem to have originated. All right, there you go. So for you brothers that do not worship Christmas, okay, hey, I'm not against you, because it has its origins in Brumalia, along with different solar or celestial bodies that connect to the worship of the arcane. All right. So here is a Lake Greek Bromalia, borrowed from Brumalia. Okay. 6th century. We already talked about that. All right. So there you go. So that's all I have to say on that. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the stream. I'm sorry, for my guy that showed up earlier. This would be a couple guys that showed up earlier. I was having technical difficulties, and we had to redo this all over again. Shouts out to D Hayes. Shouts out to Let's Be Frank. Shouts out to all my boys my bros that came through. Man, sorry about that earlier, and hope you guys all have a good day. And we want to drop this off before the 40-minute point, because just want to do that. I'm not going to be here long. Okay. And peace out, bros. I'm out. Keep your heads up.